stocks keep draining, stress builds up. Oil prices right now are very moderate. At some point, that would have to put upwards pressure on them again.
We're not out of the woods yet, so don't be fooled by the calm right now. There is still trouble on the horizon, both in terms of global energy markets and in terms of a possible war. Donald Trump said that this week they're giving the Iranians a break. There's not going to be any back and forth fighting because of the funeral procession for the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, who was killed on the first day of the war. And it was just last week that J.D. Vance said this is just a temporary interlude, that the Americans are just stocking up their fuel supplies and getting their weapons possibly ready for another round of battling and fighting that could resume as soon as the festivities are over in Washington and the funeral procession is over in Iran. And that will happen at the end of this week. I'm Borzu Deragahi. This is my podcast. It's called Badlands, and you can subscribe at borzou.substack.com. You can also find me on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on YouTube. Would love to get some more followers on YouTube. If you are someone who follows YouTube and likes to watch podcasts or TV shows on YouTube, hey, consider liking mine or subscribing to mine. So I have later on today an interview with an energy analyst, Robin Mills, who talks a little bit about how the world economy is not even out of the woods yet in terms of the oil supplies and how there is still much to do in terms of not just getting oil stocks replenished, getting reserves replenished, but also just making demand meet. So although there's this illusion that everything is back to normal, it's nowhere near to normal. And the Strait of Hormuz is only experiencing a fraction of the traffic that it was experiencing before the war started. And that means that there is still a energy crisis on the horizon and that we could be facing somewhere down the line. But first, I just wanted to talk a little bit about this whole thing with the FIFA and Donald Trump interceding on behalf of the star U.S. player who was red carded out of a round of the tournament. He basically stepped on the ankle of a player from Bosnia-Herzegovina. He was given a red card. That was a controversial call. And this player was essentially ejected for that game. And under the rules of any kind of FIFA international games, if you get a red card, you're not allowed to play in the next game. And there's a logic behind that, is to prevent players in tournaments or high-stakes games from inflicting career-ending or season-ending injuries on star players, to make the punishment so severe for those kinds of plays that players avoid doing those kind of things. So that's why they have the red card in place. So anyway, U.S. didn't like this call. And Donald Trump apparently, it's the biggest story in the world right now. I don't need to explain much of it. Donald Trump essentially got on the phone with Gianni Infantino, the guy who gave Donald Trump the FIFA Peace Award last year. I don't know what kind of corrupt dealings these two guys have together. Knowing Donald Trump, I'm sure it's pretty creepy and severe. And, you know, Gianni Infantino obviously wants to become a member of the Epstein class. He's an aspiring Epstein class member. And Donald Trump is apparently it's his entryway into that group of characters and players. And so there's some sort of corrupt dealings there. And you know, my point is that, you know, the Belgians are very upset about this. They're saying the Belgians who were scheduled to play the United States in a game last night. By the time you get this, the game will be over. It almost doesn't matter what the outcome is. No matter what is going to happen, this just shows the lack of grace and the lack of professionalism and the complete corruption of our ruling elites. But I think that there's a broader point that's kind of interesting here. The United States hosting this tournament has been playing games and manipulating and exercising its power and bullying teams and players for months and months and months. And that included the Iraqi team and included the Somali referee. Remember, he was denied a visa. And it included the Iranian team, which was systematically subject to abuses by the U.S. authorities as they tried to take part in this tournament. And they were ultimately knocked out because of several controversial calls that were questionable. But I spoke to a football journalist. There's a podcasts here in which we discuss it, and I trust his opinion. He said they were legit calls, and Iran lost and was kicked out of the tournament fair and square. But the broader point is like Team Belgium and all these European princes who are now complaining about Donald Trump's corruption and the corruption of FIFA and how the host country is playing games and bullying people. They said nothing when this kind of stuff was happening to the Iraqi team or the Somali referee or the Iranian team. They were just like, hum-de-dum-de-dum, oh, I don't see no problem with that. And now all of a sudden when they're the victim, it's like there's a problem. No, this is outrageous. This is a violation of decorum and so on. Where were you when they were holding the Iranian team at the Mexican border for like 4 or 5 hours, not allowing them to go through, denying them visas and forcing them to like hustle onto the airplane right after the games and head back to Mexico? Where were you? Were you speaking out about the honor and sanctity of the game and the rules then? No, you kept your mouth shut. So now you keep your mouth shut because now you're the victims of Donald Trump's tyranny and bullying and arrogance. And so, now it's your turn to taste it, to see what it's like to be the victim of this kind of abuse, your national team. And I mean, I don't feel any sympathy at all for any of these football players. I mean, these guys, they're all like multimillionaires and they're superstars in their own right. It doesn't matter to them. This whole World Cup thing is prestigious. They do win a little bit of money out of it, but it's not like going to make or break their careers. So either way, so there's no, it's really a matter of just football mores and this kind of very insular world of football values and soccer and FIFA is this very corrupt organization. The UEFA, the European Football Federation, is complaining about this. It didn't complain at all when Israel, which is a member of the UEFA, was sitting there like bombing and killing Palestinian football players. So you know what? You know what I say to Belgium and what I say to the European football players and to the European football associations? Fuck you. Really, seriously, fuck off. You have no right. You have no standing to be like talking about, oh, the United States is bullying us around and they're using their power to. You didn't say anything when it was other people. And you're just basically hypocrites. Anyway, on that note, I did an interview with The World, the radio station, the BBC Boston collaboration, in which I discussed a little bit about the subject of yesterday's podcast, the funeral for the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, and what it means for Iran, what it could mean for Iran's future, and whether or not this funeral is a display of strength on the part of the Islamic Republic, or whether it shows anything else, whether it's emblematic of any aspect of Iran's current relationship to the rest of the world.
Iran's Islamic Republic designed that elaborate mourning ritual for its supreme leader to send a message to the world. We're here to stay. But with internal divisions, an economic meltdown, and the threat of renewed war with the U.S., many are wondering if the Islamic Republic can survive intact. Borzou Daragahi in Paris joined us to talk about that today. He is the founder of the Badlands podcast and newsletter.
The Iranian regime, I've been watching it for my whole life. And they're really good at these kinds of choreographed events. I don't think it shows anything new. When Qasem Soleimani was killed in 2020, and there was funeral services and funeral ceremonies for him all over the country as well, those were really big as well. They know how to draw out a crowd. There was no doubt in my mind that they'd be able to do something like this. But the timing of it is a stark reminder to the world that, yeah, they have some domestic legitimacy as well. They have perhaps not a majority of Iranians that support them, but a very large number.
One notable thing, though, is that Moshtaba Khamenei, the new supreme leader, who was named supreme leader after his father was killed in a U.S. airstrike in February, he has not been in attendance at any of the funeral events so far. How significant is his absence?
Yeah, that's pretty wild that he wasn't there, that there was no voice evidence of him. There was no speech that was pre-recorded, anything. And we haven't seen anything or heard anything from him. There is a possibility that he never survived that attack, or he's in such a condition that he can't be brought out into the public. There's also the possibility that they're just worried for his security and they don't want any chance that Israel will use satellite and other signals technology to trace him back to his hiding place and assassinate him. In either case, despite the fact that you have a supreme leader who's absent, basically, the regime has remained coherent. You have these apparatchiks, essentially, that are running the government, being the public face of the government without the supreme leader there. It's just more evidence of how coherent the system is.
So the system, the regime, they are strong, you are saying. Is it clear which individuals within that system are actually wielding the power? If it sounds like there are some questions about to what extent the new supreme leader is actually wielding that power.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually pretty transparent in Iran. You have the Supreme National Security Council, and in that council, there's all the main regime figures. That includes the foreign minister, that includes the chief negotiator, Ghalibaf, who's also the Speaker of Parliament. It includes the head of the Revolutionary Guard, this guy Ahmad Vahidi. But behind that, there is a darker element. There are these pro-regime militias. There's the judiciary, which I think is impervious to the cultural changes that are taking place in the country, and it continues to do awful things like this spate of death penalties and so on. And they're much more in the shadows. The revolutionary courts. If you look at Iran and Iran experts and watchers, they're pretty clear about who runs the country.
I understand there are some new divisions within the leadership of the regime, though. Do you see those as significant in terms of having a unified, strong leadership?
So they've always been arguments. There's always been divisions. They've always had their competing newspapers and media outlets, now websites and news agencies that rip into each other and so on. So you've had these factional fights forever. And if anything, right now, the question is, do we bomb the Israelis and the Americans without any provocation, or do we wait until they hit us and hit them? And that seems to be the debate right now. That seems to be the dividing line.
You have mentioned, and you are arguing, that this war has actually emboldened or strengthened the regime. What about economic sanctions from the West? How have they impacted the control the regime has over its population?
Well, I think the economic sanctions actually, in recent years, they have weakened the middle class and drained the middle class that would be the harbinger of any positive democratic change in the future. The Revolutionary Guard and the hardliners and the regime elite managed to actually exploit those sanctions for their own benefit. So I don't think that it's necessarily an existential threat. It does weaken the system. It does create a lot of popular discontent. And that creates a lot of opportunity for, let's say, foreign mal-wishers or foreign interlopers to come in and via satellite channel, via internet, via infiltration operations, stir up more discontent. And that's what the Iranian regime believes happened in December and January and led to those protests that really threatened the regime, brought out a lot of discontent. So I think that the sanctions do have an impact. But for now, at least, Iran is like the primary sanctions evader in the world. And, for example, the Russians go to the Iranians to sort of figure out how to evade sanctions because they're really good at it. And there's also this alternative economy developing, this Eurasians economy that's outside of the traditional international banking system with Russia, China, and Iran and other so-called rogue states taking part in it. And that is somewhat blunting the impact of the sanctions.
You were born in Tehran. You've been reporting on and following this regime for decades as it has continued to survive after the Islamic Revolution. What do you think will determine whether it can continue to survive? What are the key factors?
Well, I think that if the system is able to be more flexible, and it has shown some signs of flexibility in recent years, for example, with the women life freedom movement and the women demanding more cultural power and freedom in public spaces and so on. And it was forced to show in that situation a little bit of flexibility, the regime. And it did so grudgingly, but it just had to do it. And when it did, it actually didn't threaten the regime in the way they thought they would. You have a government that basically was coming together in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And they're really haunted by that experience of Gorbachev loosening the tight controls of the Soviet Union only to watch the whole system collapse. And so they're really paranoid about that. And they think that if they even just give an inch, that whole scenario will be repeated again. And I think that if the system learns that they can relax, they can even allow some political opposition, they can allow some reform without risking a collapse of the whole system and a collapse of the state and so on, they will survive more. But if they remain brittle and remain completely authoritarian and continue on with, for example, the death penalties, the horrific record numbers of death penalties in the country, they will continue to build up resentment in the population, and eventually there'll be another explosion.
That was longtime international correspondent Borzu Daragahi.
I wanted to introduce our guest today for today's podcast. His name is Robin Mills. He is an energy analyst, a very respected one, closely following energy markets. He has his own consulting firm, as well as he is a senior fellow at Columbia University's School for International Public Affairs. Please welcome our guest. Please enjoy the interview. I'm here with Robin Mills. He's an energy analyst at Coma Energy, as well as a senior fellow at Columbia University's School for International and Public Affairs. I just wanted to talk to you about energy markets these days. Especially there was a claim by J.D. Vance in an interview last week that the Trump administration's strategy is to just let the world replenish its oil stocks so that it'll be more prepared, suggestively or presumably, for another round of armed conflict potentially. What do you think of that assessment? Are the world's energy stocks being replenished, and will the world be prepared for an arm? Is that strategy a winner or a loser?
Yeah, it's a question what timeline you're talking. If we're talking over a timeline of months, then clearly not, right? I mean, the Gulf is still nowhere back to normal. Transits are up and down day by day, but they're not. They're still not on average at pre-war levels. So we're still several million barrels per day down in production of where we were pre-war. So stocks are not getting refilled. In fact, stocks are probably still draining globally. And, so far we've been saved from that by China cutting back its imports, but that can't last forever. Longer term is a different story, but yeah, short term, definitely that's it's not going to work out like that.
You talk about traffic somewhat returning to normal. Do you have an estimate of how much traffic has returned to normal? There was a claim that in that, I think, same interview with J.D. Vance, he said, yeah, there's not as many ships that used to go, but there's a higher concentration of ships loaded with oil or gas that are going out. Is that accurate?
Well, they've concentrated on the tankers, right? Because that's kind of the critical thing. So the numbers are very up and down day by day, and also, of course, there's all the trying to distinguish all the dark transits that are still happening is tricky. So every ship tracker will have a different estimate. But I think you could say round figures. Okay, so pre-war we had 20 million barrels per day of oil going out of the Strait. Now some of that's been diverted through the alternative pipelines. You could say on the range of 4 to 5 million barrels per day of that. So you're left with 15. How much of that is now currently going through the Strait? 8 to 10, maybe, out of 15. So it's still well down the pre-war levels. What we're also seeing is quite a lot of the oil going out is basically stored oil. So it was either ships that were stuck in the Gulf throughout the conflict or oil that was in storage tanks onshore. Once that is cleared off, of course, then the rate of exports will drop off until the production resumes fully. I don't think there's a big issue in resuming production, but there is an issue in getting the tankers moving freely and readily so people feel comfortable in ramping up production.
Do you think that there is a shock still to come? Have we been buffeted by this Chinese reduction in imports? And is there another cliff that we're headed toward? Or will the cliff be more of an easy route?
Well, I think both sides are kind of shadow boxing at the moment, right? And Vance's comments it should be seen in that light. The Iranian comments, they're also playing good cop, bad cop, and threatening to close the strait at the same time as they negotiate. And all these talks of hardliners versus moderates and so on. Okay, there's some differences of opinion, but a lot of that is for external consumption, I think. So overall, I don't think we're headed for an immediate cliff, but certainly things are not getting better.
Even if the memorandum of understanding holds and there's no geopolitical shifts, is there still a cliff coming? Is there still a point at which the ships that were out to sea will have been unloaded and the ships that are just departing the Gulf now will not have arrived yet, and there'll be a sort of gap? Is there anything like that coming up?
No, I don't see that, because ships are kind of moving, although even if not pre-war levels. But I think what we would be concerned about, look, if normal transit doesn't resume, we continue to be down several million barrels per day. Stocks keep draining, stress builds up. Oil prices right now are very moderate. At some point, that would have to put upwards pressure on them again. But then we'd have to say, the Iranians obviously tried to keep this situation going, trying to keep the pot boiling a little bit, attacks on some ships. So to say, don't try and use alternative routes, use the Iranian route, and try to limit traffic that way.
You've talked a little bit, I saw on social media, about this, and there's been some reporting on it as well, this alternative plan to just bypass the Gulf altogether, build pipelines to the Sea of Oman and the Red Sea and so on, and just not be dependent on this choke point anymore. Are steps already being taken in that regard? I mean, we know about the Saudi pipeline that was running through the war, and we know about the port at Fujairah. But is there infrastructure already being built? Have they put out bids at least or anything like that?
Yeah, so I mean, the UAE is building additional pipelines. They were already building one actually before the war, started in 2024, a second pipeline. Now talked about even a third pipeline to carry refined products, so gasoline and diesel and jet fuel. The Saudis, I'm sure, are looking at boosting the capacity of their line. And then you've got the tricky ones. You've got the ones that are stuck inside the Gulf, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait. They would have to go through Saudi Arabia, a lot more politically complicated. I mean, this is not something that happens overnight. This is even with good political will, that's a 3 or 4 year job.
Okay, yeah, 3 or 4 years. That's interesting. And what about Iraq? It is in some ways the country that has been hurt the most by this conflict in terms of the Gulf states and the Middle East, economically at least. They have not been able to get much of their oil out, have they?
No, they're sending some oil by truck through Syria. They're sending oil through pipeline to Turkey, but that's limited. So Iraq has lots of options. Actually, in a way, they're in the best place. They can go through. They can build a pipeline through Syria, or reconstruct the existing pipeline, which they've talked about. They can build a pipeline through Jordan, or expand the pipeline through Turkey. So they have options. But as usual with Iraq, they're stuck in politics, in arguments, in problems financing all these things. They have to reach agreement with their neighbours. Relations are not bad, I would say, with those countries, but certainly complicated. So a lot of things in the way of them progressing all those alternatives. But Iraq badly needs it for sure.
That infrastructure as well will be 3 to 5 years if they choose that alternative infrastructure path, you think?
Yeah, 3 to 5. Syria could happen, at least using the old pipeline patched up maybe in a couple of years. The Turkey pipeline, that exists, of course, and needs some rehabilitation work. But the problem for the Iraqis is moving the oil from the south, where most of their production is, to the north, where they can connect to the line to Turkey. And that is, yes, they've issued bids. It's just started working on part of that. But, the Iraqi state never moves quickly for these big infrastructure projects.
When you talk about the GCC countries, the 6 Gulf Arab countries, Kuwait, Oman, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, is there a split that has happened at this point? Has that split become more defined in the last few weeks between the UAE-led axis, let's say, and the Saudi-led axis?
I think you can always look at differences between the countries, but I think they've generally all of them have shown a greater willingness to work with the Iranians, and hopefully. Yeah, I mean, maybe to different extents. Obviously, you'd say the Omanis and the Qataris were closer on the whole. But I think all of them have said, look, there's a new reality here. And another war is not the way out of this for anybody. And some kind of cooperation. I mean, of course, they're suspicious of the Iranians and and pretty angry about how the war unfolded, but also recognise that their neighbour is not going away, and working with them, if the Iranians are willing to play constructively, some of the Gulf countries.
What about the role of this R4, this quadripartite diplomatic powerhouse that's emerging? What do you think of that? I'd be curious to ask you. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, and Pakistan, sort of filling a diplomatic vacuum left by a U.S. that is retrenching and rewarding incompetence in its diplomatic corps. What do you think of that?
Well, I think the US has been looking for partners to bear some of the burden in the Middle East and on the diplomacy, and you saw that a lot, obviously, in the negotiations hosted by Pakistan, and Pakistan won itself a lot of credit by doing that. So, yes, I mean, the US has obviously fought a badly judged decision to start the war, and then the strategy itself fighting the war was also misjudged. But even beyond that, of course, the US has been looking to reduce its Middle East commitments for a long time. If it sees countries that can step in and solve problems on its behalf, That's good from a US point of view. But of course, those countries will solve problems in their own ways, and that still isn't necessarily always exactly what the US will want, as I think it'll find out. These countries, particularly Turkey, absolutely has a history of going its own way.
Absolutely, and to a large extent, so does Pakistan. But when you talk about this group, do you think that, and if I may introduce the wild card here, Israel, do you think that one of their concerns, in addition to Iran, is this increasingly ambitious role of Israel vis-a-vis the Gulf and that part of the Middle East in general?
There's always a reshuffling of alliances within this region and the wider region, and I think a desire not to be dominated by any one hegemon, particularly from within the region. Okay, the US had that role as an offshore hegemon for many years, but certainly none of these countries want to be dominated by a single one. We've seen kind of semi-alliances against Turkey in the past, yes, no one wants to be dominated by Israel either.
Yeah, I mean, what are you hearing? Is that what people are telling you? Is there concern? How would you characterize the concern among, let's say, Gulf diplomats and Gulf people that you speak to and other interlocutors about Israel?
There's a lot of different opinions about Israel, and again, it depends which country you talk about. But look, I think in general, there's not a hostility to Israel. Yes, you would find hostility in some places, but not a generalized hostility, not at the level of the leadership. But there's absolutely a recognition that Israel was a prime force in starting and waging this war without concern for the security of the Gulf. And Israel suffered rather little in this conflict, and the Gulf suffered a lot. So absolutely, there's a desire to have a more restrained Israel that is not carrying out these dangerous adventures.
And what about the Iranian threat, so to speak? There's obviously a difference in the ways that the different Gulf countries view this Iranian threat. How would you characterize how they're dealing with it? I saw, for example, recently at the funeral services for the Supreme Leader, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and Qatar all sent representatives, while Kuwait, Bahrain, and United Arab Emirates demurred.
Yeah, these diplomatic things always are reading the signs a bit. I mean, at the funeral of President Raisi, of course, it was more straightforward. Everyone could send a delegation. For the Supreme Leader, how exactly do you kind of rank him? I mean, obviously, I guess in practice, head of state but a religious leader too. So, what's the appropriate kind of person to attend, particularly after you've just fought a war or been involved in a war against Iran? That's kind of a tricky one. But look, I think in general, as I said, there's a lot of still anger and hurt against Iran and the attacks on the Gulf states, and particularly some of the Gulf states which have been trying to be constructive. Like Oman or ones or Qatar, which generally try to be a bit at least neutral, as well as against the ones that were more US aligned. But I think like I say, the view is, look, Iran is next door; it's not going away. There are some constructive figures in the new leadership, and there are some more worrying ones. But try and engage with the constructive ones as best as possible. Some of them seem like guys possibly you could do a deal with. There
were reports recently in the Washington Post and other news outlets, I think the Wall Street Journal as well, that the U.S. bases and infrastructure in the Gulf were hit hard, particularly. There was much more damage to those facilities and to that infrastructure, including signal intelligence infrastructure, such as satellite relay stations and communications equipment, was very, very severe, the damage. Do you see any evidence that the Americans are rebuilding their infrastructure in the Gulf?
Well, I saw the reports, of course. Can't really speak to the accuracy of those. The rebuilding side, I don't know. I mean, I think we saw the bases, were they useful to the US or were they more of a liability? So that, and also a liability to the countries that host them. But I don't imagine the US is going to walk away from a military presence in the region either.
But you haven't seen any evidence, any reports, any commentary from interlocutors that say that the Americans are rebuilding?
It's been early days, so I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to ask you that. All right. Well, great, Robin. It's been such a pleasure again. Robin Mills, energy consultant, as well as a senior fellow at the Columbia University School for International Public Affairs. And why don't you make a pitch for your consulting firm, if you'd like?
Yes, thanks. So I run Camera energy consulting firm based in Dubai. We're advising across Middle East, North Africa on all kind of energy. a lot of oil and gas, of course, but also the new energy forms, renewables and others. And this current conflict has shown, just how important good strategic advice is for the Middle East countries and their governments and companies here, as well as any energy company looking to come here and invest.
Robin Mills, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much for listening. I'm sorry about the inferior production quality here today. I'm in Paris. I'm in my usual studio setup in Istanbul. I am Borzu Deragahi. This is my podcast. It's called Badlands, and you can subscribe at borzu.substack.com. I'm also available on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts.